Post-splashdown Crew News Conference. NASA astronauts Mike Hopkins, Victor Glover, Shannon Walker, and Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency astronaut Soichi Noguchi splashed down off the coast of Panama City, Florida, Sunday, completing NASA's first commercial crew long-duration mission aboard the International Space Station. The return comes nearly 6 months after the crew members arrived at the space station and also marks the longest duration mission of a crewed American spacecraft to date. It was also the first night splashdown of a U.S. crewed spacecraft since Apollo 8's return in 1968. Welcome home, Crew-1.
Thank you.
Thank you, Megan.
Crew-1 astronauts worked on a number of experiments as part of Expedition 64 and Expedition 65 on the space station, including tissue chips that mimic the structure and function of human organs to understand the role of microgravity on human health and diseases and translate those findings to improve human health on Earth. They also grew radishes and different types of lights and soils as part of the ongoing efforts to produce food in space, and they tested a new system to remove heat from spacesuits. They had significant roles to play in 5 spacewalks outside the space station. Victor completed his first 4 spacewalks, including 3 alongside Mike, who now has done 5 spacewalks. Noguchi joined NASA's Kate Rubins on the 4th spacewalk of each of their careers. During the spacewalks, the astronauts connected cables on a recently installed science platform, prepared the station for upcoming solar array upgrades, serviced the station's cooling system, and completed other maintenance tasks. We are so pleased to be joined by Mike, Victor, Shannon, and Soichi today and are excited to hear more about your incredible mission. We'll give the crew a chance to make opening remarks, and then we'll take questions. Media on the phone can ask a question by pressing *1 or withdraw a question by pressing *2. You can also ask questions on social media by using the hashtag AskNASA. Let's go over to you first, Mike.
Okay, good afternoon, Megan. Good afternoon, everyone. Over 6 months ago, we were sitting here at a news conference, and I was talking about the amazing teams at NASA, SpaceX, and in the DoD that had overcome so many challenges, including a pandemic, to get us to the point of being ready for launch to the International Space Station. In fact, I mentioned that those teams and the tens of thousands of people all around the world that had been working tirelessly against COVID-19 had inspired the name of our Crew Dragon capsule, Resilience. And now today, we're sitting here again at a news conference, our post-mission news conference, and I'm even more impressed. In fact, I'm in awe of those teams because, quite frankly, I don't know how our mission could have gone any better. From the launch to the rendezvous to the docking to joining Kate and Sergey as part of Expedition 64. Megan, you mentioned the spacewalks and the robotics operation and all of the science that went on board, the relocating Resilience from the forward to the Zenith docking port, and then last week the undocking, deorbit, and splashdown of Resilience. More or less, I think everything went like clockwork. In fact, I'm not aware of any objectives that weren't accomplished for our mission. And so on behalf of Crew-1, we want to thank all of the folks at NASA, at SpaceX, DoD, ESA, JAXA, CSA, Roscosmos, and all of the organizations and companies and personnel that contributed to this mission. Just a job well done. I'd also like to thank your families because I know there were a lot of late nights, there were a lot of weekends that you spent away from home, and so I think your families deserve some thanks as well. And speaking of families, I'd like to thank our families. I do believe the hardest part of spaceflight is on the families. There's a lot of stress, a lot of burden that they have to carry, and our families did it amazingly well and with a lot of grace. And then finally, I'd like to thank my crewmates, Victor, Shannon, Soichi. They made being the commander of Resilience extremely easy, and it was an absolute joy getting to live and work with you all on the space station. So thank you very much. We're happy to be here and looking forward to your questions.
That's great to hear. Thanks, Mike. Let's start with Bill Harwood with CBS News.
I'm interested in, for the three of you that have experience on a Soyuz, could you maybe compare and contrast a little bit Soyuz compared to Crew Dragon, and maybe even for Victor? I know this was your first entry, but any thoughts you have as a veteran high-performance aircraft pilot? Any insights you have into what it's like to come home on a Crew Dragon? Thanks.
Sure.
Who wants to start? I guess I can start. There are some differences. It's not necessarily significant. I would say the G-loading profile that we see is different for each one. Neither one's better or worse, but they're just different. And then coming home, it's the same thing. The G profile is different. When the parachutes come out is a bit different, and so you spend less time under a parachute on the Dragon than you do under the Soyuz. Landing in the water was interesting because none of us really knew what to expect, but I would say from my standpoint, it felt a little bit softer than landing on land. And then having the rocking motion after you land in the water. I think we got very lucky with Sea States. It could have been a lot more dramatic than it was. So some subtle differences, but a lot of similarities as well.
Okay, we'll take the next question from Robert Perlman with Collect Space.
Hi, thanks. Maybe a question for Mike, since you set up camp in Dragon, but for any of you, the next crew to launch on Dragon, on your Dragon, won't be going to the space station. They'll be spending a few days inside. Is there any concern, or would you have any concerns about spending more time in the Dragon on orbit without having a destination to go? And are there any pinch points or anything that you think that you would want to have changed if you were going to spend all your time inside the capsule? Thanks.
Yeah, that's absolutely a great question, and I think all of us are very excited about the upcoming mission that Resilience is going to have potentially later this year. The vehicle is made to go in for what we call free flight for around 5 days or so, and so I think in terms of having any concerns with being in the vehicle for that amount of time, no. I think the one thing you have to do though is be very prepared and have a plan for how you're going to handle just all of the logistics, if you will, in terms of what you're going to unpack and when you're going to pack it, how you're going to pack it. I guess actually that's probably the first thing, to try and do that in a smart way, because the space is small, and so you do need to take those kind of things into consideration. But at the same time, there is there's enough room in there for the four of us. I think we're certainly comfortable. And again, if you're going into it with that knowledge, you can find ways to work around the constraints that you do have given the space. And so again, I think the mission is going to be extremely exciting. I think they are going to find ways to make it work, and we're hoping that maybe we'll have a chance to actually chat with them a little bit beforehand as well, and maybe we can just pass along some ideas or suggestions that maybe could be helpful.
Okay, let's take a question from Selin Barber with Low Profile.
Thank you for taking my question. Congratulations on your successful mission. Mike, as commander of Resilience, which collaborative activities are you most proud of during your time, and why? Thank you so much.
Yeah, Selene, that's a wonderful question, and I think, well, first of all, I think collaborative activities, the fact that we're here sitting with you today is probably what I'm most proud about, is the fact that we pulled it off and made it work. But I really, it kind of goes back to when we were in training. Victor and I had been assigned last, I guess, August 2018. So we had been working quite a while together in our training, in the development of the Crew Dragon, and then Shannon and Suichi joined quite a bit later, actually, pretty late in a training flow. And there was one point in our training flow where we were we were practicing docking, and of course, as most sims have, there's things that don't go quite right, and there was just something special about this sim, because we had something that wasn't going as planned. And we sat in the capsule and we talked about it, and every single one of us had something to contribute to coming up with what the solution was. And after we successfully docked in that sim and we got to go home, we were sitting around the table having dinner that night, and all of us were just beaming at how well that day had gone. And in hindsight now, I think that was a good precursor for what the mission was going to be like, because the mission went that way as well.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to Amy Thompson with Space.com.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. My question is for Mike, and I was interested in some of the space gardening that you did while in orbit. I think you did some plant transplanting, and I was just kind of wondering, what that was like and how important it is for astronauts to have fresh food on orbit. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question and something that I think all of us actually at some point had a hand in raising some of these crops up there. And so Megan mentioned the radishes that we did, and then we also had there's an experiment called Veggie, and so we had an opportunity to do a couple of cycles, if you will, with the Veggie experiment. And in one of those, like you said, we were able to when we had these pillows that you would grow the plants in, and when some of them didn't germinate and we didn't have any plants, we were able to, one that had a couple of plants in it, we were able to take some of those and transplant it and have them be successful and actually able to harvest some food off of them later on. So that was pretty exciting. We also were able to actually grow some of the plants for a longer period of time and go through multiple harvests on them as well. And so I remember there was the one time when we had completed the harvest, and I guess that was what was it? I was on one of the mustards, and we created wraps, lettuce, kind of like a lettuce wrap at dinner that night, and it was amazing. Absolutely fantastic to have that fresh food, and it wasn't just that either. You would float into that module where the crops were growing, and you could just smell it, and it smelled like the fresh produce section of your grocery store. And there's something special about that connection to Earth that I think is pretty powerful. And the great thing is, I think we're getting closer to where we can hopefully start to see it moving from being an experiment to something that's just kind of standard operations is having fresh food up there.
Very cool. Okay, let's go to Jasmine Willis with KRCG. Jasmine, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Astronaut Mike, thank you so much for taking my question. What's the most significant moment you experienced on the mission and why?
Was that for everybody?
I didn't get it.
I couldn't hear the question.
Yeah, can we repeat the question?
Hopkins?
Okay. Wow. Okay, so I think what I heard was what was the most significant part of the mission and why. That's a very hard question to answer because there was a lot of significant moments. I think the launch itself was significant because this was the first time that we had a full crew on board the commercial vehicle and taking us up to 7 people on board the International Space Station. That was a huge moment. And then of course I've got to say splashing down and having a successful end to the mission was a huge moment as well. And then everything that we had going on board the space station, from the spacewalks to the science. And then one that sticks out to me, I think it's was the port relocation. It was extremely impressive to me at how smoothly that port relocation went when we took Resilience and we undocked from the forward docking port and we moved around to the zenith docking port. It really surprises me. It doesn't surprise me, but man, it was just amazing that the first time that we've done this and it went according to the schedule. And you usually see some changes to the schedule, or a little late here, a little early there. But I mean, it just marched right down like it was written out. And so, yeah, just like a sim. And so it was extremely impressive. And one of the reasons I say I think that is such an important part is because there's going to be a lot of vehicle traffic coming up to the International Space Station over the next 4 or 5 years, particularly with these commercial capabilities coming up. And there's going to be a need to move vehicles around. And so having this capability, I think, is going to be extremely important. And I would certainly say that was one of the highlights of the mission.
Okay, great. Let's take a question from So with NHK.
Hello? Thank you for taking my question. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead and ask your question.
Okay. Hi, okay. So this is Tetsuo from NHK, and I have a question for astronaut Soichi Noguchi. Well, it's been second time in the history that there's 2 Japanese astronauts on ISS on board. And I wonder if you can tell me what was the interaction with Aki Hoshide, the other Japanese astronaut, besides event that task-key handover? And also, I'd like to know, obviously, the third space flight and what makes, if you can name any particular event that makes this flight memorable. It'd be great if we can just do it in both languages. I mean, if that's possible.
Okay, so thanks for the questions. Answer very briefly in two languages. Obviously, Aki is right now commander of the space station. He's doing great, and it's purely a joy. It's not just Aki, but accepting new members to the space station. Because most of the time we're 5 of us, the 7 of us, and then it's whenever the new members coming into ISS, it's a joy, and it's especially fun if you know the person really well. And I know Aki for almost 25 years now, so it's good to have him on board. Obviously he's experienced, and he's now is a great commander. 星出さんに関しては本当に、宇宙ステーションで、彼と一緒に数日間過ごせたことは本当にいい思い出になると思います。今、ISS で、船長として素晴らしい活躍をしているので、最後まで頑張ってほしいと思います。
Thank you, Soichi. Let's go to a question from Marcia Dunn with the Associated Press.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You have me?
Yes. We have you.
Loud and clear.
Okay, yes. Question for you, Mike. We all loved your little dance once you got out of the capsule. Did you go straight home to your own beds that night in Houston, or did you end up having to go to crew quarters at JSC? And how did you all feel? And since the private crew is going to be taking Resilience on its next orbital spin, would you say that average people can handle a reentry on a Dragon, or is the launch more of concern when you're talking about regular people and what they can withstand? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. I think, as far as my little dance, I think the adrenaline was flowing pretty good at that point. But certainly it was interesting the difference this time versus the Soyuz when we returned in Soyuz. Because when you return on the Soyuz, you get on a plane and it's basically a 24-hour return before you get back. And I think we were back here in Houston within 6 hours, 7 hours or something like that. And so it's amazing the amount of recovery that happens just within that first 24 hours. And so to be already back here and already around your family members and things like and just having to do more than what you normally would do when you're sitting on the airplane or laying on the airplane and getting a lot of sleep. And so I think that was a little bit more challenging. And so for myself personally, when we got to crew quarters, we had to do some medical activities right away, but then after that I took a nice long nap, and it felt pretty good. And so I ended up, my family joined me, and I ended up staying that first night in crew quarters. And I could have gone home, but I didn't feel that there was a need to, and so I thought that went pretty well. And in terms of what it's like coming down on Resilience and landing in the water, and Shannon mentioned earlier the G profile and the difference there, and I know that I do believe that even the civilian crews, they're going to go through some centrifuge training, and so they're going to get to experience some of those G profiles, and so it's not going to be completely unique to them. If you think about it, when we're going through all of our training, it's in a fixed base simulator, so we're not experiencing the Gs and all of that as we do most of our sims as well. And so I think that they're going to be able to handle it just as well. I think it is going to be, the opportunities to pass along what it's like, what it feels like, can certainly be helpful. And I know, again, within the Soyuz world, that information, that what we call gouge, that gets passed down from crew to crew to crew, and it's extremely helpful just to know what to expect when you're going through those types of very dynamic events.
All right, thank you. Let's take a question from Candace Sweat with NBC5.
Yes, this question is for astronaut Victor Glover. Just wanted to know, and I'm based in North Texas, by the way, so Happy to see that you're representing Texas well, but just wanting to know how it feels and has it really sunk in for you yet, being the first Black astronaut having done a long-term stay on the International Space Station.
Well, thanks for the question, and I think the historic nature of this mission, period. I think we need to unpack it a little bit and talk about all of the amazing things that we were able to accomplish on this mission. But I will answer your question specifically. But it's in the context of a bunch of amazing things that we were able to do with this team. And so to finally have this done, I think that's the most important part of it that resonates with me, is that we finally done that, so that now we can focus on the next person that gets to go and live on the space station successfully. So I'm glad to have been in this position, but it wasn't something that I chose or that I set up. But now that we've done it, I'm glad that we get to celebrate. And I've been receiving a lot of emails and messages from folks that say, "Hey, my kid saw you, and they're so excited." And it's great that he can look at the NASA TV broadcast and see someone that looks like him. And I think that's important. I think we all need to be able to dream in all colors, and so that's important. But I think it's also important that NASA continues to do our missions well and successfully by making sure we have the right people involved. And so I don't know if it's ever going to completely sink in. I think there's a lot to unpack and to process from this mission, and I'm still writing in my journal and looking at all of the lessons. But I'm very grateful to all of the people who helped to make this possible, and I'm very happy to have done my little part to move things forward. So thanks for the question.
Thanks, Victor. Okay, let's take a question from Lucy Auberg with ASP.
Hi. Thanks for taking my question. So it was the first nighttime splashdown since 1968. Were you rather worried about or excited about that? And how did it feel to come back at night? Can you describe it a bit? Was it one more challenge for you?
Kayla, you want to take it?
Yeah, I would say really from our standpoint, it really wasn't much of an extra challenge. Our activities were exactly the same, and we had lights on inside the capsule, so it was most of the time until we turned them out. But so it was our activities were no different. And I think the hard part, or the harder part, was on the search and rescue team that had to find us in the dark, and they had practiced that a lot, so they were very well prepared. I think if it had been daytime, it would have been exactly the same for us.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Let's take another question from Bill Harwood with CBS News.
Hey, thanks much. I just wanted to go back to my same question, but to Victor about reentry and maybe get his impressions of this as a jet pilot, what he thought about coming down in the Crew Dragon.
Well, this is much more dynamic and much greater duration than anything that you would get in a fighter type aircraft. And so I think having that experience and being under G and in a dynamic environment can get you some context. But launch and entry are such unique experiences. And then to couple that with living in microgravity and experiencing weightlessness for 167 days, and then being subject to 4.5 Gs for over a minute. I mean, that is just it's dynamic. It will definitely get your attention. There was a point where I was just saying to myself, breathe. Inhale, because I felt really heavy. I felt like those cartoons when they experience G and your face is just sagging down. But it was very dynamic. But at the same time, we had things to do. We were monitoring altitudes and speeds and G loading, and so that we could stay on schedule, knowing when the seats were going to rotate, when the chutes would come out. And I think we were able to do all of those things successfully. We stayed ahead of the spacecraft. Going way back to DM2, Bob and Doug gave us a lot of gauge about what that event was going to be like, and that it would come very quickly. And I think we expected it to come fast, and so we were ready. And that's what I would say about the whole thing was I expected it to be so dynamic and so challenging that the actual event, I think, was a little less than what I was expecting. And so it was enjoyable all around. But the high G loads, it's a good thing. The G is going sort of into your chest, almost directly into your chest, as opposed to head to toe, which is what you would experience in a fighter aircraft. And that makes it hard to stay conscious. So going into your chest makes it a little easier to, keep situational awareness, but it makes it hard to breathe. So focus on your breath.
All right. Interesting. If you are media on the phone and you have not had a chance to ask your question yet, please press *1 to ask a question. We'll take another question from Celine Barber with low profile.
Wonderful. So piggybacking off of Bill's question, you're talking about physical experiences. Let's transition a little bit more to the psychological or philosophical experiences. Can any of you choose to describe an awe-inspiring moment?
Wow.
Yes, I'd be happy to. I was very fortunate in the sense that I stayed in resilience the whole time. So that was my crew quarters while we were up there. And the advantage of that was I had windows. And wow, to be able to live in a crew quarters where just when you're sitting there and you're getting up in the morning, you get to look out the window and see the earth going by is pretty incredible. But that's not that awe moment. The awe moment happened after we had done port relocation. And we had to shut down all of the power and the lights in the vehicle because we were doing some work in the Node 2, which is where we were docked to. And so all of that had been shut down, and so the work was done, and I had floated back into resilience to power things back up and turn on my computer, but it was during a night pass. And of course the window's right there, so I glanced out the window, and oh my gosh, it just took my breath away because right there in front of my face is the Milky Way. And you're just seeing all these amazing stars, and you can see the Earth just kind of glowing in the background, and you can see the atmosphere, just this thin layer of the atmosphere, kind of glowing in the background as well. And there's no light pollution or anything. You are just, it was amazing, unbelievable. And then fortunately after that, the master, Soichi, came in, and because I immediately or shortly thereafter come floating out, and I'm like, you guys got to come see this. And Soichi came in with his camera, and hopefully if you haven't seen some of the pictures, and particularly the time lapse that he took from looking out resilience at the night sky, that's definitely worth a look.
All right, thank you. Now we'll switch over to a few questions that have come in on social media. Michelle's 4th grade class is asking if you can watch sports in space.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
We have people on the ground that can send up a TV channel to us, and we get to choose what we get to watch and when we want to watch it. And if we've got the right satellite hookups, then we can watch TV. So we watch. Do we watch sports? Watch some sports. We did watch a lot of sports.
Super Bowl.
Yeah. We did watch Super Bowl. Yeah. Yep.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks. Liam on Twitter wants to ask Soichi, did you notice any difference between Dragon's re-entry compared to the shuttle and the Soyuz? Which did you find the most enjoyable?
Well, shuttle, Soyuz, Dragon, it's a good question. It's hard to compare. Of course, for the impact-wise, the shuttle is hard to beat. My case is Colonel Eileen Collins' kiss landing, and it's very soft, but the people tend to forget that after the main wheel touchdown, we have a pretty slamming motion of the nose wheel touchdown. So that's actually not trivial. Soyuz, of course, it's like a crash into the ground. For this one, I would say it's very benign and almost a touchdown. So I really like it, and impact was very, very minimal. And right after splashdown, we feel the wave motion. That is, we are come back to Earth, the water planet. And it's exactly as forecasted, like a 5-second period, and I feel it. So that's a great feeling, which we don't have for the 167 days.
Right. Thank you. Okay, we have a question from Joseph on Twitter. How different is it to adapt to a new schedule of sleeping routines? It must be weird to have 8 sunrises per day.
We actually get 16 sunrises a day because we go around the Earth once every 90 minutes. Unless you're the lucky one that gets windows all the time, a lot of times you don't notice all the sunrises and sunsets because we're working inside modules that don't always have windows that are open. So it's we're on a schedule. We're on Greenwich Mean Time. We sleep according to that time. Now that we're back here, we're sleeping according to Houston time.
All right. Kelsey, age 8 on Twitter, wants to know, what was it like unbuckling for the first time in microgravity?
Great question. And it's really challenging to describe. We talk about this sensation of floating, but it's not like floating in a swimming pool, because you don't have, even when you're in a pool, you have gravity. So if you flip upside down, you're still aware that you're upside down, and you can see the bubbles going toward your feet and whatnot. But I've started saying this, it's like living your dreams about flying, being able to actually be in those moments where you can push off and just coast down the space. And so my first moment that I remember significantly was getting out of the seat to then go look out the window, and I recorded a short video on my tablet, and the whole experience was just awe-inspiring. It was so amazing to be floating and to see upright in the vehicle, and then look out and see the Earth in a whole different orientation, and then to look back in and see my crewmates in the vehicle in an orientation. It was just, my brain was like, what have you done? Where are we? And it was an amazing experience, and it did not get old. For 167 days, it was amazing to float. And Mark showed up, and we started doing upside down day, and to use the ceiling as the floor, and it just never got old. And I do miss that. I do miss it almost as much as I miss sunrise and sunset.
Awesome. All right. From Twitter, we have a question about the experiments that you conducted or tested in space on Space Station. I know we've talked about this a little bit already, but just from your perspective, actually working with the experiments, can you talk about that a little bit?
Can I start? Sure. So, one interesting thing, I was talking in a conference about one of our science experiments, and I said something that I went and wrote it down later, because I think it's an important perspective. So this isn't about any one experiment in particular, but just, we run the gamut from sort of being a lab technician to being a researcher. And I think that aspect of our involvement, from being very heavily involved to sort of, I just move this fluid from here to here, or move this block from here to here, and being comfortable with that I can do something that is easy to redo if I mess this up, to this is this one opportunity to get this data for this person who has been researching this idea for a decade or more, and I don't want to mess it up. And being comfortable with that breadth of responsibility. You may be heavily involved in the research, and you may be just the lab tech, not just as in that's not a significant job, but you have to know those different responsibilities and be comfortable in those different roles. And that's one of the aspects I think that really resonated with me in my involvement in the research, is how broad our responsibilities could be.
And I'll just add one other thing to it, and that was with us coming up bringing 4. And so increasing on the USOS side, we had 5 crew members. The amount of flexibility that gave us in terms of executing the science, it allowed us to, like there were multiple times where Shannon and I would be working on the same experiments, doing some of those different roles that Victor was just talking about on the same day, where one of us would do one part of it, and then the next part of it, we'd be looking through a microscope and seeing the results of it. And it was kind of fun, because then you had an idea of what they were seeing, and you could share in the excitement of it. You could share that excitement with the investigators on the ground. So it is pretty impressive with the additional crew members on board how much science we were able to do.
One thing I can quickly add about science is the science does not stop on the space station. It actually grows on the ground side. One of the experiments I did is growing the basil, and again, the plant, dealing with the plant is fun. And it's 12 Asian Pacific countries, joint countries and regions joined together, and the students participate on the ground side to do the same kind of experiment. So we know that we are only playing a small portion. The main portion is on the ground. The students does the main science, and it's very fortunate and honored to join in those type of adventures.
Thank you. Okay, we have a question from Nicholas on Twitter. What types of foods do you eat in space?
All of them, Nicholas. All of them. If they're there, they get eaten. We have a standard menu that makes sure that you get the appropriate nutrients that you need. There's plenty of calories. We have a variety of drinks, but we also are allowed to fly up foods that we request, we bonus food or crew preference food, and that can vary as long as it meets certain packaging requirements and it has the appropriate shelf life. We get quite good food up there. And so I think I speak for us all. There was a very popular dish, and Hopper was smart enough to fly refried beans. And refried beans were popular for two reasons. They were great, they were delicious, but they're also good at sticking other foods together. So they were a very popular side dish whenever Hopper would break out the refried beans.
Well, I would also add that's one of the best parts about being on the International Space Station is international food. So not just the refried beans, but we had lots of yummy Japanese food that Soichi brought. We had American food. We had food from Europe and then the Russian food. So lots of choices, which is really nice.
That's great. Thanks for that great question, Nicholas. Glad we asked. Okay, what about this one from Twitter? Which is more challenging to adjust yourself physically, the first few days in space or after coming back to Earth?
Yeah, so I at least for me, I've got to say, coming back to Earth is definitely more challenging. And you know, it's interesting because when we arrive in space, when we got to the space station, I mean, boom, we're working, and it's a full day. And there is no way I could have done a full day the first day coming back down to Earth. And I think there's a couple of things that contribute to that. You know, first of all, when you're in this new environment, when you get up into space, you're floating, you're seeing the Earth, and you're pretty fired up. I mean, you're very excited to be there, and so there's that certain just adrenaline. That's a good way to describe it. Adrenaline that's flowing. When you get back, it's at the end of 6 months. And so there is a certain amount of exhaustion that builds up over a 6-month mission where you are on duty the whole time. And so when you finally splash down, there is definitely a little bit, Shannon just did it, that sense of that, that just relaxation, that relief, that the mission, that you've done your job and the mission is done, and you can kind of relax a little bit. And I think that contributes to it. But then there's also, I believe, a lot of physiological effects. You're feeling heavy. You're feeling wobbly, very, very wobbly as well, and so you're having to deal with all of those issues, including the fact that, hey, this is at the end of the 6 months as opposed to at the beginning.
All right, thank you. We'll wrap up with a final question here. Maybe it's too soon to ask, but Joe on Twitter wants to know who's ready to go again.
I'm gonna enjoy Earth. There's a letter up there on the hatch to the airlock, written by one of our colleagues that passed away in the Columbia accident, unfortunately. But one of the last sentences, he says, "If I had been born in space, I would long to go to Earth much more than I long to go to space." And I thought about that every day, and I'm very happy to be here on terra firma, and I'm going to enjoy this for a while.
All right, we'll take that.
Eventually, but we'll deal with that later.
Yeah, we'll ask you again later, but 3 out of 4 isn't bad. All right, thank you so much, Crew-1, for taking our questions today. It's great to have you back on Earth and looking good and sounding great. We really enjoyed hearing about your mission. That's all the time we have for questions for this event, but you can join us on Facebook in just a few minutes. In about 10 minutes here, we'll get started with a Facebook Live with this crew on NASA's Johnson Space Center Facebook page. The URL is there on your screen. So if you still have questions, ask them in the comments there. And be sure to follow all the activities going on the International Space Station and with the Commercial Crew program online on social media or on nasa.gov. Thanks for joining us.